I wouldn't want to interrupt anyone. I think this is sufficiently long enough that I can hang myself. Good morning, everyone. I had the good fortune to have breakfast with Reverend East and Reverend Carpenter on when was it? Thursday morning.
Do you want to know what you did Wednesday?
I'm feeling a little too comfortable with this group. I just want to, but to that end, I mentioned to Reverends East and Carpenter that, listen, I'm here this Sunday, God willing, next Sunday and the following Sunday. Here are my demands. To which then I rattled off. I want a corner office. I'd like reserved parking. It is really wonderful to be here. And I suspect, as in most cases in life, you're often as good as either your last class, your last talk, your last encounter. So if the projection is for the next 3 weeks, it really is dependent on, but kind of get the drift. I want to share with you some insights, and the operative is some insights into what I consider a very important portal into a broader understanding of the Bible. And that is the book of Samuel. And I say that obviously to a group of Christians, some Jews who are here. And I say it certainly to my congregants. It is a manageable text. And not to dumb it down in any way, it canvases really a scope of so many convergent, parallel issues. It deals with theology. It deals with history. It deals with politics, interpersonal relationships. I mentioned theology. It deals with God's role in history, perceived or actual. And I say that not in a pejorative sense, how we perceive God's hand in our lives, or perhaps through the transmission or intermediary of another human being. In the case of Eli or Samuel, or even the Witch of Endor, it's all in these two books. And how biblical scholars either date or view it in the context of the Bible is subject to ongoing debate and insight. I find this one of the more fascinating texts in the entire Bible. And while I don't have deep familiarity with the Christian Bible, the themes, just to double down on my opening remark, the themes that are interwoven in these two books, Samuel's 1 and 2, are themes that speak to all of us, or certainly have relevance to all of us, and how we apply it within the context of our own religious traditions. Before we delve into a bird's eye view, focusing in on some specifics, but still looking at the generalities of the text, I want to just go over a very brief timeline here. And when we deal with ancient history, we, in the same way that we will deem the Dark Ages as a period of history, we use it metaphorically. We're in the dark. We don't know for certain. When I say let's look back 4,000 years, we do have literatures, we do have archaeology, we can puzzle some of the lifestyle, the issues that human beings struggled with at its time, but we're fuzzy at best. Now, that doesn't mean that this is folly. There are serious minds over the centuries that do speculate as to what occurred or how, again, we can puzzle it back together. But in a linear fashion, if we hold that the patriarchs and matriarchs lived about 4,000 years ago, 1900 BC, and folks, I mean absolutely no disrespect when I say BC and AD analogous to positive integers on a timeline or negative integers, right? So if I say 1900 BC, then we're dealing with 4,000 years approximate, okay? Again, no disrespect, but I don't want to assume things either. And here we really are dealing with not historical facts, but in some cases myth, not as a falsehood, but what we project, what we, again, puzzle together, thinking what might have occurred, based also on literature, but literature that's often been redacted, in some cases, thousands of years later. Not thousands, but a healthy 1,000+ years later. Follow? Again, this is not a slight, this is not holier than thou. It's just what we have at our disposal, the collective we. Exodus from Egypt, somewhere around 1,500, others say 1,200. Again, these numbers are fluid. Joshua and the conquest of Israel after Moses dies, he hands the baton of leadership over to Moses, and Joshua takes over. To give you an idea of how fluid the whole field of serious biblical study is, there is strong speculation that the historical veracity of the book of Joshua is subject to great scrutiny. Now, that's euphemistically saying that in all likelihood it didn't happen. At least that's current scholarship. But again, it's provisional. It's provisional till something else comes along to topple what is understood as our understanding. And it was Chaim Potok. I don't know if you knew or read of him. He wrote a number of actually quite, I thought, very beautiful books. He also wrote some historical works. And I believe it was he who coined the term provisional absolutes. The period of the Judges is a fascinating time, and also incredible descriptive stories from the span of roughly 1450 to 1040. And that brings us to this morning. About 11th century BC, 1030, 1040, and that is the kingship period. Starting with Saul, of whom we'll touch on in the book of Samuel, King David, of which I'm hopeful next week we'll focus more narrowly on King David, and that's important also as far as the messianic line and how the Messiah is perceived in the Bible is multifaceted. To skip to the chase on that, one central understanding, certainly through a Jewish lens of the Messiah, is a mere mortal, a human being who can once again, through either military intervention or dynamism, political coercion or conviction, can once again bring back the scattered tribes of Israel and unify them, the lost tribes of Israel, to bring them back to the land. And then, of course, Solomon. And then after Solomon, all hell breaks loose. The confederate of Israel, the confederation of the tribes, the 12 tribes. First of all, again, let's shatter certain myths, in this case, in a negative sense, that there was all this harmony and great cooperation between tribal boundaries. Scrap that entirely from your memory. At times, it was also vicious, often vicious infighting, intra-battles, both. among the tribes themselves. As much as times change, I would argue the foundation, the core of human nature remains undiminished, for better and for worse. And as an extension of that, the greatest challenge that any of us face is often with ourselves. In any event, that's the area. 1040, 1030, kingship. After that, we're somewhat off to the races in terms of what can be much more understood and has a historical antecedent of understanding, because now we're into the 10th century, the 9th century, and heading towards the 1st century and so on. But here you have the construction of the first temple, and that takes place under the rule of King Solomon. One of two temples becomes the religious, political, economic, social, cultural epicenter of ancient Israel. And of course, here, not at the first temple, but at the second temple history, we have sectarianism, the Nazarenes, the rise of Jesus. And here we really do have the development and greater solidification of monotheistic, and I would argue ethical monotheistic development. Huge chasm between monotheism writ large and ethical monotheism. The dictate that God demands goodness from us, expects, wants, please goodness from the human being. Big difference between monotheism and ethical monotheism, but that comes farther down the line. The primary focus of the book of Samuel, primary, not exclusive, is the middle section of ancient Israel. Think of it in a crude, analogous way as the Mulholland Pass between, say, the city and the valley, or maybe Switzerland as a land bridge in Europe. And here, JER, it's funny, I'm into pens, but my penmanship is atrocious. Here is Jerusalem, but the temple was not yet built, not until about the 10th century. And the Holy Ark, which we talk about, the Ark of the Covenant, think of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I'm not trying to dumb it down here, but these are not universal, but they're very powerful themes. Remember, when the Jews are leaving Egypt, and I'm using the term anachronistically, the term Jew comes much later in history, the Hebrews, or as some biblical scholars would say, the Levites, left Egypt, everything was portable. They didn't have hotels to stay. They didn't have houses that were permanent. So their church, their sanctuary, their synagogue was portable. Not until the conquest of Joshua do they come into the land and they settle the Holy Ark of the Covenant, not in Jerusalem, but in Shiloh. So again, this is the heartbeat. Here are Philistia, or the Philistines, a coastal people, not Israelites, and they will also come into the fray as we broaden our understanding of the book of Samuel, the books of Samuel. At the end of our session today, I photocopied, it is not my work at all, and I'm trying to scratch my head when I did this. I think it was some time ago, but it was definitely from the internet, all right? But I like the article, and I might have edited it somewhat. I believe I did. But you can go back and put in some keywords and probably get the full article. But it will give you a nice distillate, a nice overview of the books of Samuel 1 and 2, and that you can read on your own. I'll hand that out to you before you leave, okay? And thank you guys for photocopying it here. Next week, I will try, though I'm not, I will try to photocopy a nice color map. Again, I did not put this together, but I think it's a great illustration of where the 12 tribes settled, and that's important to the book of Samuel, because remember, here we have the rise of the kingship that tries to unite the united tribes of Israel, and that's exactly the way you should look at it. And by the way, in the formulation of the United States, you knew better, or as well as I, that among the colonies themselves, there was under no uncertain terms was there complete agreement. Far from it. Great debate, internal, intra, inter, and so on. But I love when I can learn history, whether it's biblical or a specific other area of history, when I can see it and I can understand it more in a linear progression.
Where's Shiloh?
Shiloh is right. I'm not going to move this only because I think it needs to be on the camera, our camera there. But it's right here. It's north of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, we'll find out, again, comes later with King David's conquest. Jerusalem is a Jebusite area. You can hear somewhat of the alliterative similarity, Jebu, Jerusalem, okay, Yerushalayim, and the Jebusites. Jerusalem is chosen as the center for any number of reasons. David, who becomes King David, is a military strategist. Without fanfare, his military tactics are studied in military colleges. And why does he choose Jerusalem? For a number of reasons. One, most central, it's on the high ground. Jerusalem's about 2,000 feet above sea level. And as in antiquity, as in modernity, whoever controls the high point, be it mountain ridges or space, controls what goes on the grounds. Also, another reason, it had water. And that was, of course, as it is today, the lifeblood. King David, for all of his terrible, and my words here, and I come down hard on him, I do, not vices, but immoralities. He was a brilliant strategist and military man. Okay, but Shiloh is where Joshua's conquest of Canaan leads him to place the covenant of the ark.
How far north is it from Judah?
I don't know the exact distance. Not more than I'm speculating here. Just looking at maps and thinking about maps. I would think within about 6 to maybe 10-hour walk. All right. And it's hilly too. The area is, if any of you have been to Israel, Israel in many ways, the topography of Israel is similar to California. And Carmel, Mountain Ridge, you have mountains that are not as majestic. Well, they're quite beautiful, but not as majestic as, say, the Rockies, but are so above sea level that you can actually ski in northern Israel during the winter time. Southern Lebanon, incidentally, in that general region, has ski slopes that no longer now, but at one point, certainly no longer now because of political infighting and so on within Lebanon and the instability in southern Lebanon. But in terms of the topography, comparable to the Alps, in terms of if you're into skiing and so on. There's one mountain ridge in Israel, and one mountain in particular, Mount Hermon. And I must say, soon, trying to think, before our first daughter was born, I was still in school, and I actually skied Mount Hermon. I like to ski, no longer. Well, my goal is to be able to walk intact at the end of the day. I'm finding that difficult without even going skiing. Okay, any other comments, questions? Let's get down to work. Open up your text and turn to the first chapter of the first book of Samuel. Would someone, are the books the same if someone calls pagination? Pages? Page 233, folks, yes? Large print is different? When I read a biblical text, I love to understand the names of the individuals. And remember, every translation, even if you're a native speaker in whatever the language is a translation. Native born English speakers, if we read a piece of English literature, we're still going to interpret it in the way that perhaps speaks to our own generation or sensitivity, our vocabulary. Every translation is an interpretation. That said, I just love to try to unpack the names and understand them. So there's a man from Ramthiam of the Zuphites in the hill country of Ephraim. And Ephraim is, again, this general area. We're talking about the middle section of Israel, both modern and ancient. That's the epicenter of the story. We'll go farther north and we'll go somewhat south. That's the heartbeat. He had two wives, one named Hannah and the other Penina. And again, I ask the question, what does Hannah mean and what does Penina mean? This guy's name is Eliyahu, or Eliyahu, excuse me, son of Taurus, Azuz. He had two wives, Hannah. Hannah means from the word chain, grace, graceful. It's a beautiful name and it describes beauty. And the other is Penina. Penina is also a beautiful name, means coral or a pearl. Both words, Hebrew words, are used. Hannah, certainly a Jew or non-Jew. Penina, there's no ownership one way or the other of a name. But Penina is less common in the sense that, some names are more popular than others. Like Ethel was more popular. It's coming back a little bit, but Hannah is still or variations is still very popular. Penina had children, but Hannah was childless. This man used to go up to the town every year to worship and to offer sacrifice. Now I'm reading from a different interpretation, so I don't know how what I'm reading varies from what you're looking at, but it's close, right, and it's all rich. I mean, I love looking at different interpretations. This man used to go up from his town every year to worship and to offer sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh. Same area we talked about, Shiloh, before Jerusalem is established. Hophni and Pinchas, the two sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord there. And here again, to dig beneath the surface, the names. Hophni it implies corrupt. So this is more than a foreshadowing, right? And then Phineas or Pinchas can mean one of two things. One, more positive, the other less so. The less so is forked tongue, or almost like a serpent, or a serpent's mouth. Yeah, forked tongue. And could also mean oracle, someone who has the forethought, the ability, God-given to perhaps puzzle together what might occur in the future, okay? The two sons of Eli. Eli means my God. Eli, can hear the similarity. We're priests of the Lord there, as I said. one day Elkanah offered a sacrifice. He used to give portions to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters, but to Hannah he would give one portion only, though Hannah was his favorite, for the Lord had closed her womb. Hannah had no children. All right, let's stop here. Stream of consciousness. What does this, just the story, remind you of? There are two wives, one who has two wives married to the same man. This is a polygamous arrangement. Remember, in the Bible, polygamy was permitted, but polyandry was not. It was forbidden, soundly forbidden. But what other examples do you think of in a polygamous marriage? No one's on trial here. Well, not by me as the judge, and I think we're all on trial, but all right, I digress. Who do you think of other biblical figures that might come to mind who have who are in a polygamous marriage where one wife has had children and the other has not? Abraham and Sarah. Who else? Jacob. Yeah. Rachel. Yeah. Rachel and Leah. It's interesting, and I ask this question to myself as I share it with you. Can I think of an example, and I'm not being glib here, where a polygamous marriage actually has worked? And I have yet to come up with an example. I'm not kidding. Perhaps there's something in the New Testament I'm not aware of, which admittedly I'm not, but I don't know of an example. And yet this theme is not quite a leitmotif, but biblical scholars will take hold of, here is something that kind of reminds us of Abraham and Sarah, or Sarah and Hagar, and Jacob and Rachel and Leah. And in the case of Jacob, it's very clear that he favored Rachel, and the very notion of favoritism. Why? Why is it saying this? We don't know why. With Rachel and Leah, pretty superficial reasons, if you ask me. And the Hebrew itself is nondescript because of physical beauty, because of physical affect. I'm not saying that's not important to an individual, to each his or her own. But when you think of great religious leaders, you would expect, I would expect something a little bit deeper than that. Again, I'm not saying in one's person that these are not important things. All right, we're not going to read all of this here, but you get the idea. And though Hannah was his favorite, for the Lord had closed her womb. Moreover, I'll read a little bit more. Moreover, moreover, her rival, to make her miserable, would taunt her that the Lord had closed her womb. This happened year after year. And again, the rivalry, what is often the ugliness of these relationships. Every time she went up to the house of the Lord, the other would taunt her so that she wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah, and Elkanah is also an interesting name. Elkanah means God has Kanah, God has acquired. Her husband Elkanah said to her, Hannah, why are you crying and why aren't you eating? Why are you so sad? Am I not more devoted to you than 10 sons? And this is interesting also from a psychological, theological, sociological standpoint, how children are used really as shits here, right? You know, some type of pawn or leverage, which is really, really remarkable. Talk about triangular relationships. And I say this because if we think that this text is not relevant, the broader brushstroke of this text, we're deluding ourselves. It's speaking to us today. obviously with a different historical framework. And that's why I get excited about this text. And that's why, without being melodramatic, I really do believe it's a wonderful portal into a deeper understanding of biblical literature. And your mind can run free, and the parallels and the words that are used, the imagery that's created, and so on. All right. So after they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose. The priest Eli, my God, Eli, was sitting on the seat near the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. In her wretchedness, she prayed to the Lord, weeping all the while, and she made this vow: O Lord of hosts, if you will look upon the suffering of your maidservant and will remember me and not forget your maidservant, and if you will grant your maidservant a male child, I will dedicate him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor shall ever touch his head. Now, the last part I want to start with first here. No razor will ever touch his head. Anything come to mind on that?
No.
What? Samson. In what category did Samson define himself as? What's called a Nazir. Someone in Samson was an adult. Here, this yet unborn child, yet unconceived child, is already being devoted by his mother. Samson was a Nazir. He took a vow as an adult not to cut his hair and not to drink intoxicants. I want you to know, to fast forward to, well, what would be rabbinic literature time, say around the 1st century, time of Jesus. The rabbis, it's hard to categorize rabbinic thought in that it's unruly. It's often hard to categorize specific biblical thought because it too can be unruly. That is to say, there's inherent contradictions or challenges within the text itself. But pretty much mainstream rabbinic thought opposed denying oneself. And I'm not saying this in a passive-aggressive sense, but asceticism was looked down upon within mainstream Jewish thought. It still is to this day. In fact, there's a comment in the Jerusalem Talmud, which ironically was written in the Galilee in the north of Israel and not in Jerusalem for any number of reasons, another time perhaps. There's a statement that says, you will be held accountable for every legitimate pleasure that you denied yourself. Every legitimate pleasure that you denied yourself. It's not a green light to be a hedonist, it's every legitimate pleasure. It's okay to indulge, obviously, without making yourself the center of the universe. So that is what Hannah is basically saying here. But what else is she saying? That's the second part, the Nazir, the one who will not cut his hair, the one who will not drink intoxicants. But in its most basic expression, what is she doing that she or you or I haven't done in our lives? Bargaining. With whom? I don't look down upon this. I do it too. Listen, folks, I've written about this. Not that the theological titan of our era. I'm not. Why are you laughing so hard over there? You know, my feelings, many of you do at least, and I mean this with the height of sensitivity, I think the notion of a Messiah is a theological cop-out. I don't care if you're a Jew or a Christian. And I say that because what would the Messiah say to us that we haven't been told before? And seriously, all right, now you can challenge me on that. Well, Michael, maybe this, that, or the other thing, and I'd yield to that. But essentially, what? Don't gossip, don't manipulate, don't be passive aggressive, be honest, but be sensitive, work on yourself, improve your soul, struggle with ultimate issues of existence and so on. But after it's all said and done, don't think for a minute, and I say this, and I think in many ways I'm a reflection I'm no different than anyone here. And it's not because Jew or Christian. Scuttle that. Just as a human being, there are times when I pray for salvation, whether it's personal salvation because I'm not talking about in eschatological salvation, what happens in the end of days, though I pray about that too. But because I'm just in such a bind, or someone I love is in such a bind, and I pray for some messianic redemption. So I push away with one hand and I bring in with the other hand. But that's what Hannah's doing here. And she's no different than I or you. And that's what she's doing. And lo and behold, that's what happens. As she kept on praying before the Lord, I'm on chapter 1, verse 12. And I don't, yes, anyway, you with me, folks, kind of?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As she kept on praying before the Lord, Eli, my God, watched, and I'm giving, it doesn't say my God here, but again, I want to emphasize the names and the meanings. Eli watched her mouth. Now, Hannah was Hannah, this delicate, graceful, it also means class, but not obnoxious. That's a classy person. Not because, he raises his pinky while he drinks tea, right? Hannah was praying in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice could not be heard. So Eli thought she was drunk. Eli said, "How long will you make a drunken spectacle of yourself? Sober up." And Hannah replied, "Oh no, my Lord, I'm a very unhappy woman. I have drunk no wine or other strong drink, but I have been pouring out my heart to the Lord. Do not take your maidservant for a worthless woman. I have only been speaking all this time out of my great anguish and distress." That's where prayer really, really, I think, speaks to an honest, very deeply honest personal expression. You're not doing it, maybe, yes, you are in a petitionary sense. But boy, there's no pretense here. All right, we'll skip ahead. So Elkanah, God has acquired. Konez, to acquire. El is another name for God. You know that. El Shaddai, Elohim, Beth El, the house of El, house of God. Elkanah knew his wife. The euphemisms here. I've always argued the Bible's NC-17. Who are we kidding? Knew his wife. How do you do? Elkanah knew his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. Hannah conceived, and at the turn of the year bore a son. She named him Samuel. And now, what does Samuel mean? Here it actually offers a translation. In my translation, I asked the Lord for him. And the word can also, so Samuel, Sha'al, Lish'ol is the infinitive, to ask, Sha'el. But it could also be interpreted as Shmuel, from Shema. As if God has heard or God hears. And lo and behold, here we're off to the races. And here's Samuel. Okay. All right. Now, I'm sensitive to the time and the amount of material that I have prepared is quite a large amount. So let's, oh gosh. All right, I'm gonna keep going with you on this one. All right, look, let's go ahead. Let's look at chapter 2, verse 22. With me, folks? Yeah. Any need to call a page out? You're good? Now, Eli was very old when he heard all that his sons were doing to all Israel and how they lay with the women who performed tasks at the entrance of the tent of meeting. He said to them, "Why do you do such things? I get evil reports about you from the people on all hands. Don't, my sons, It is no favorable report I hear the people of the Lord spreading about. If a man sins against a man, the Lord may pardon him. But if a man offends God, who can obtain pardon for him? But they ignored their father's plea, for the Lord was resolved that they should die. Young Samuel, meanwhile, grew in esteem, favor both with God and with men. Let's move ahead. Let's look at verse 33, just for time's sake. Same chapter, verse 33. With me, people?
Yes.
I shall not cut off all your offspring from my altar, but to make your eyes pine and your spirit languish, all the increase in your house shall die as ordinary men. And this shall be a sign for you, the fate of your two sons, Hophni and Pinchas. We know what their names mean. They shall both die on the same day. I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who will act in accordance with my wishes and my purposes. I will build for him an enduring house, and he shall walk before my anointed evermore. What's happening here? Eli comes to the realization, both brought to him and probably just through his own observation, that his sons are not up for the task. Again, eternal themes. And by the way, this is negative. I mean, these sons are lowlifes. And it may not be a case where one's offspring, whether one has offspring, could be nieces or nephews or whoever, runs a corporation. And the child is not interested, the adult child's not interested or not capable. It's not because he or she is bad. Here they're bad. And we want moral leadership. We're not talking perfection, we're talking decent. All right, and this is, of course, a foreshadowing of what's going to happen. Comments, questions up to this point? Otherwise, we're going to plow ahead. All right, yes.
Is the message here that the Lord is holding Eli responsible for his son, for the miscreants who are his children? Because this passage that we started here, that seems pretty, egregious.
Yeah.
That's a technical term we use in Presbyterian. But is that what this verse 33 is getting at? Namely, that not only are your children going to be punished by a simultaneous death, but you too are held responsible because you're going to be supplanted by Samuel.
Yeah, I don't think Eli, well, I may be romanticizing the text a touch. I actually think Eli is really tied into the mission. And my reading of him is that he wants truly the best people or person to succeed him. And again, I'm being a little too idealistic here in the sense that everyone has ego. Everyone wants to leave I don't know everyone, but we want a good legacy. A good name is eternal. I believe that. But I would perhaps deflect the question ever so slightly in that up to this point, I'm led to believe that Eli, and we're reading this somewhat elliptically, right? I mean, we're picking, I'm cherry picking here. But we're led to believe that Eli wants one of his sons to carry on the legacy. He clearly is interacting with Samuel. There's no question that there's a relationship forming between Eli and Samuel. But at this point, I'm not, as a reader, I'm not convinced that Eli wants Samuel to be his successor. He wants either Hophni or Pinchas. And those boys, adult men, adult children is better said, are not up for the task, clearly, because of the lifestyle they've chosen.
Well, they're already faithless priests, right?
Yes,
Because
yes.
The opening passage there.
We knew it, and we knew it, the foreshadowing of their names. Something nefarious is going to occur here. Let's move on for a little bit, okay? What do you say? So, you know what? Yeah, what the heck? Let's do this. So this prophetic interaction with Eli and God comes to fruition, as you might imagine. And let's just look at the textual support for that. Look at chapter 4, turn forward, chapter 4, and oh, you know what, this it's so good. I don't want to no, all right, anyway. Let's look at chapter 4 real quick. Someone read it. Read it from your seat. Or you know what, should I read it because of the voice? Yeah. All right. Samuel, okay, Samuel at Shiloh with the Lord, with the war, no. Is that right? Yeah, Samuel at Shiloh with the word of the Lord, and Samuel's word went forth. No. Israel marched out to engage the Philistines in battle. I love this section. They encamped near Ebenezer, while the Philistines encamped at Aphek. Okay, here's the Philistines, a coastal people, not Israelites. And there is a battle that's about to come about. All right, the tension's mounting here. The general region pretty much is down here, what would be the Negev, modern day Negev, and slightly south in the vicinity of Shiloh. And here we are talking about very close distances. The Philistines arrayed themselves. By the way, that's where we get the name Palestine. And that name is given to Israel by whom? By the Romans. No disrespect intended or inferred. Islam is the new kid on the block who won't be born for probably, once the Romans take control of Israel in the first century, for another 600 or so years. But that's where we get the name Palestine from the Philistines. You can hear the, again, alliterative connection. The Philistines arrayed themselves against Israel, and when the battle was fought, Israel was routed by the Philistines, who slew about 4,000 men on the field of battle. When the Israelite troops returned to the camp, the elders of Israel asked, "Why did the Lord put us to rout today before the Philistines? Let us fetch the Ark of the Covenant to the Lord from Shiloh. Thus he will be present among us and will deliver us from the hands of our enemies." No religious tradition grows out of a vacuum. This idea of God being present in a particular place is exemplified in what occurs as described in this section of Samuel. The Ark of the Covenant is in Shiloh. It is arrested by the Philistines, taken by the Philistines in battle. I own your God, you are mincemeat. I own you. And this is a military conquest, a land grab, a treasure conquest. And that's exactly what happens. But you could also imagine the emotional strain that it has on the people. Think of, I don't even want you to think of, but 9/11, when our Pentagon is actually bombed, how demoralizing that is. Leave aside, but don't leave aside for too long, the cost of human life. Major cultural icons, an attempt to crash into the White House. These are things that are demoralizing. I think one of America's holiest of holies is in the National Archives. Can you imagine if that's destroyed? Wow. And that's what's happening here. And it's happening here with a tribal confederacy that hasn't been united, that there's infighting within the tribes, and there's fighting between the tribes. So there's, just all heck is breaking out. Oh, who am I talking to? All hell is breaking out. It's just, yeah, I'm getting the nomenclature down. Anyway, all right. So you see what's happening here, and we're in a heap of a lot of trouble. Let's read on. Let us fetch the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord from Shiloh, thus he will be present among us. Verse 4. So the troops sent men to Shiloh. There Eli's two sons, Hophni and Pinchas, were in charge of the Ark of the Covenant of God, and they brought down from there the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, the host enthroned on the cherubim. The cherubim are these mythic creatures that are attack dogs. You know where they most recently were mentioned within the yearly cycle of the first 5 books of the Bible within a Jewish community in the Garden of Eden story. Do you remember when Adam and Eve are sent from the garden? By the way, they're not sent from the garden, they're banished. The Hebrew is so harsh, it is, no apologies for my language, get the hell out of here. And don't you dare come back. In fact, so much don't you dare come back. God puts these cherubim, these mythical creatures, at the gates of the Garden of Eden, wielding fiery batons. You imagine the viciousness of these mythical creatures wielding fiery batons as if to say, you ain't coming back. And the Hebrew again is just, it's taking you by the throat. All right. So when the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord entered the camp, all Israel burst into a great shout, so that the earth resounded. The Philistines heard the noise of the shouting, and they wondered, why is there such a loud shouting in the camp of the Hebrews? And when they learned that the Ark of the Lord had come to the camp, the Philistines were frightened, for they said, God has come to the camp, and they cried, woe to us. Nothing like this has ever happened before. Woe to us. Who will save us from the power of this mighty God? He is the same God who struck the Egyptians with every kind of plague in the wilderness. Brace yourself and be men, O Philistines, or you will become slaves to the Hebrews as they were slaves to you. Be men and fight. The Philistines fought Israel. The Philistines fought. Israel was routed, and they all fled to their homes. The defeat was very great, 30,000 foot soldiers and so on. The Ark of God was captured, and Eli's two sons, Hophni and Pinchas, were slain. They died on the same day. All right. But the bigger issue is the Ark is gone. The Philistines are triumphant. And what happens to the Philistines? There's a plague within their confines. And through military conquest, with Eli leading the charge, the Ark is returned back to Shiloh. Okay. Let me do this. Let's do this one more citation, and then I think with this, we'll pull up the anchor for today as we're nearing 10:15. By the way, as much as I always want to address respectfully, certainly standing before you and with the privilege of entering the church, I must explain the reason why I'm wearing a dark suit is usually not a good thing in the morning on a Sunday or on a weekend when you see a rabbi or priest or minister. I unfortunately have to attend to a funeral upon leaving you guys today. Anyway, I just wanted to explain that. So if I dart out of here, not uncommonly as I have, it's not because I don't want to field questions or whatever. I need to head out to the cemetery. All right. Let's look at chapter 9. Let's move forward. Starting at the beginning. There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish. What does Kish mean? Hard or what?
French pastry.
No, that's that is Kish. Yeah.
My mistake.
Yeah. No, I was thinking something else. Anyway, all right. Hard or quiche can also be used as a pig iron. Hard, right? So a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, son of Aviel, God is my father, son of Zeror. I don't know what Zeror means. And Bikorah, meaning the chosen son of Afia. Again, I don't know. I'll have to look that up. I don't know what that name is. I can speculate, but it would only be speculation. A Benjamin, a man of substance. He had a son whose name was Saul, an excellent young man. No one among the Israelites was handsomer than he. He was a head taller than any other of the people. All right. Now, first of all, the word Saul comes from Sha'al, a question, one who's a questioner. Okay, Saul. But what about the criteria that at least the Bible itself focuses in on here, and what is your reaction as we're introduced to Saul, may be tied to other biblical figures? It's an open question. Do you follow my question? Do you have any reaction as to why Saul is singled out in the description that he's given here in the Bible? What's important about this or not?
His looks.
It's his looks, his physical presence. And again, I'm not saying it's I'm not trying to downplay it, but that's the criteria, or might be the sole criterion as to why he's selected. Give me a break. And then you think of, again, how we're that way too. So as much as, again, I push away with one hand, bring in with the other hand, it's somewhat problematic. Go down, yeah. Well, what?
Quick question though. You're skipping over chapter 8. And I'm wondering why.
Partly for time, but let me just say in chapter 8, what is so significant there, in my estimation, is that the people come to Samuel, and they insist, they'll come to Samuel, they insist on having a king to begin with. I don't know if you have other high points that you would care to touch on in chapter 8. I'm not going to handle every chapter. I can't do it with you folks as much as, and I have taught this class, but I'm not exaggerating, probably 8 or more months where we did line by line. It's fabulous. I love to read Bible that way with others. It should be read in any number of ways, but one of the more enriching ways is to be able to bounce ideas off of one another. But in chapter 8, the people insist on having a king to rule over them. And that is a very, very revealing, universal, but also problematic, really problematic issue. Whether you are politically left of center or right of center, it is so your business. But the role of government in one's life is an ideological question. Do you want government to take better care of you, more of you, or less of you? And again, I'm not going there, not for fear. It's not my business. But these are questions. Do you subscribe to Adam Smith or to Keynes? And in terms of economic ideology, and that hasn't changed. The people in chapter 8, well, I am now touching on it, They say, listen, we want someone to protect us. We want someone to fight our battles for us. We want someone to ensure that our plates are full and so on and so forth. They're not wrong, but where do you stand on that? On the political spectrum, ideologically, yes.
I don't know there's a chapter 8, but isn't that where God responds to this? If you have, insist on having a king, you'll be sorry.
If you have a king, you'll be sorry. And essentially, that's not entirely what happens, but that's largely what happens. And by the way, that's going to happen, we know, and I'm saving this more for next week, with King David, and to a considerable extent with King Solomon. And by the way, once the Confederacy breaks apart after the Assyrians, I'll go over this a little bit. I know it can be dry history. I think I actually find it exciting, but after Assyria, not Syria, Assyria comes down from the north and vanquishes the northern 10 tribes. We have, even before that, we have a division between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom with different kings, some of whom are good and so a lot more are not good, really not good. But yes, there is a forewarning here. And by the way, when Samuel will acquiesce to a king, which he does in the case of Saul, he's not overly happy about it either. Yeah, it is a foreshadowing. All right, let me just read a little bit more, and you know what? I don't want to take advantage of your time. Look at verse 15 on chapter 9. Now, the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed the following to Samuel. At this time tomorrow, I will send a man to you from the territory of Benjamin. Benjamin, again, is in this general area here. That's where Jerusalem will be created in terms of the epicenter. And you shall anoint him ruler of my people Israel. Anoint in Hebrew is mashach, is to pour, Mashiach, Messiah. And what was the anointment? It was a ritual where oil was poured on the head of an individual. Why oil? It was seen as a supreme gift, an act of respect. And it made sense, certainly in an arid climate. Here, put some hand cream on. It was fragrant. It was distinct. It was rare. Think of some of the dermatological oils that we have today are very expensive for whatever reasons one uses them. But that is the term Messiah, Mashiach, Masach, to pour. And that's exactly the ritual that is occurring here. He will deliver my people from the hands of the Philistines, for I have taken note of my people. Their outcry has come to me. All right, that is enough for now, because you guys got to move on, as do I. Folks, next week, God willing, what I'd like to do is also a little bit more cherry picking, but focus more on the dynasty of King David and the role of the prophet Nathan. We'll talk a little bit, might touch on the death of Eli, the ascension of Samuel, and I'd like to, it's a big, tall order, touch on the Witch of Endor, fascinating story with all different types of angles of interpretation. Now, before you leave, as I said at the beginning, I photocopied a very nice synthesis of Samuel 1 and 2. I repeat, it is not my work. I took it from the internet, and I believe I edited ever so slightly. There are 2 pages here. You know what? May I leave them over here, and you'll just take them if you wish. God bless all of you. Have a beautiful Sunday, a wonderful week, and I really do look forward to being with you next week.